At the time, people were not aware of the economic pain that this would actually entail. But we did succeed in crushing the epidemic during its early stages.
Hello and welcome to G0 World. I'm Ian Bremmer, and today I sit down with Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis. We're going to talk pandemic, tensions with Turkey, and why Americans still can't eat souvlaki in Santorini. You want to understand the bad blood between the Greeks and the Turks? You got to go back in history. Okay, not quite that far. I'm talking about the Bronze Age. According to Homer, Greek powers went to war against Troy, a city located in modern-day Turkey, where the Trojan king's hapless son kidnapped the daughter of Zeus, a woman of unparalleled beauty named Helen, from her husband, the king of Sparta. The Greeks weren't having it, and thus began a 10-year conflict to get her back. Myth or not, the Trojan War is one of those defining narratives passed down through the region's ancient past, pitting those in modern-day Greece against those in modern-day Turkey. In the years since, the two nations have squared off in 4 major modern wars, which makes what's happening now so interesting. Tensions have been high in recent months, thanks in part to a Turkish move to reconvert the Hagia Sophia, an iconic Istanbul landmark that has long been important to the Greek Orthodox faith, back into a mosque. Then there was that not-so-subtle show of naval force this summer over disputed energy reserves in a contested part of the Aegean Sea. But lately, the Turks and Greeks appear back on track. Ankara may have overreached in pursuing oil exploration in Greece's backyard, and the two countries have recently agreed to resume maritime talks for the first time in 4 years. Certainly didn't hurt Athens' cause that U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo applied a little grease, as it were, by visiting the region in September.
We strongly support dialogue between NATO allies Greece and Turkey and encourage them to resume discussion of these issues as soon as possible.
The ongoing Turkey tiff has been just one of the many challenges facing Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, who won Greece's snap general election last year, bringing his center-right party to power with him. Since then, the world has changed a lot, as have Mitsotakis' priorities, from overcrowding in refugee camps to a pandemic that's shaken Europe to its very core. But so far, his nation has fared better than most, particularly when it came to the virus, and the Greek government has received praise for its quick response. With densely populated cities, a heavy reliance on public transportation, and a public health system all but gutted by their economic crisis and the austerity measures that followed, Greece had all the makings of a COVID disaster. But that nightmare hasn't come to pass. In fact, in July, Greece's international airports and seaports again started welcoming tourists, which Greece relies on for more than a quarter of its GDP. That reopening, by the way, did not include Americans or Brazilians. Europe's coronavirus travel bans still keep both of us out. But for others who are looking to soak up the sun in Mykonos, Greece is open for business. Still, tourists haven't been coming like they used to. The International Monetary Fund expects Greece to be among the hardest hit in the world in lost tourism revenue per capita. They project a downturn that could extend well into next year. It's a quandary in need of a Homer-level hero, and today I'm talking to the man who's trying to fill those mighty big sandals. Prime Minister of Greece, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, wonderful to be back with you, sir.
Pleasure talking to you as always.
Before the pandemic hit, if you talked about Greece economically, you'd usually say this was the problem child. This was the country that for 10 years has gone through the absolute worst, right? A serious depression that was even greater than the U.S. had a century ago. And yet today, Greece is seen as one of the most effective countries in the world in responding to this pandemic. How do you manage that, given just how much trouble you've been through?
Well, maybe one of the reasons, Ian, we were forced to take decisions very early had to do with the fact that I was totally aware that we had some shortcomings in our healthcare system as a result of 10 years of underinvestment. I was very much aware that we could not afford to lose a day in containing this epidemic. So back in March, we took the decisions very, very early. probably a couple of weeks earlier than most European countries, and that did make a difference. We trusted the experts. We focused a lot on communication. So I think we convinced people that this was for their own good, and we had a wave of public support for the measures that we were actually taking. Of course, as you know, it is, from an operational point of view, relatively easy to shut down the economy. At the time, people were not aware of the economic pain that this would actually entail. But we did succeed in crushing the epidemic during its early stages. And we made it into summer. We started opening up tourism. We did it in a very organized manner. I'd say a rather sophisticated manner by using smart algorithms in terms of predicting who should be tested and who should not be tested. We had a few imported cases, and we saw a second wave as of late August, which we've tried to contain. Obviously not by going to universal lockdown measures. This is not an option we currently have on the table, but by being smarter in terms of imposing some local restrictions. Our cases so far are around 300 per day. You know, if they stay there, I feel very, very comfortable that we will have no pressure whatsoever on our healthcare system. Economic life in Greece has resumed to almost what I would call normal. Of course, we have some curfews, bars, restaurants. Bars are not anything that has to do with physical interaction, people standing up, we don't allow. Restaurants are closing by 12. Masks are obligatory in public spaces, indoors, but also in public transport. And people also, during the second wave, have also complied. You haven't seen much of the masking demonstrations that you saw in many other countries, many European countries. 85% of Greeks think that wearing a mask is the right thing to protect yourself, but also the people you love. So I think we've also managed to muster the sort of collective support that we need to get through the second wave as well. Of course, we're all concerned about what will happen once we start moving indoors, but that's a question that we will probably need to address in November or December. As you know,
this is this is a long fight. And Greece is warmer than many countries in Europe, but it's going to get colder. People are going to want to go inside. What do you have in place to start thinking about more restrictions as you might need them? How are you going to make that decision? How quickly do you think you might need to move?
Look, I think we're very good at managing our data, and we have very good indicators in terms of looking at the trend of the epidemic. So of course, the ultimate yardstick is you don't want your healthcare system to be overwhelmed. That's why we're still, adding COVID beds, permanent, ICU beds. There's going to be many more coming online over the next couple of months, because you can always repurpose beds, but not at the but you shouldn't be doing it at the expense of your healthcare system. So I think the real challenge is make sure people work from home as much as we can, private sector, but also public sector. This is all quite new. Keep schools open for as long as you can. We actually made masks mandatory even in kindergarten. So we started with mandatory masks at the age of 4. There was a lot of reaction, but I can tell you, kids are pretty obedient. And even if they don't fully succeed, we have enough kids wearing masks. We've had very few problems at our schools so far, so we want to keep schools open for as long as we can. And of course, the challenge is going to be sectors such as entertainment, theaters, movies, cinemas, whether they can operate at a significantly reduced capacity, and what sort of additional economic incentives you need to give them in order for them to at least make it through what is going to be a difficult winter. And of course, food and beverage. One thing we're doing is we are subsidizing, this may sound trivial to you, but in Greece it is quite important, we're subsidizing external heaters for restaurants so that people can sit outside for longer.
As you said, for many Europeans, Greece has been one of the highlights in the news over the past months. Has that improved, that together with the fact that the Europeans have come together with extraordinary budget and relief for the southern countries, is that changing the view in Greece of the Germans, of the Northern Europeans, of Brussels? Do you feel that the European franchise is actually becoming more robust or at least more integrated on the back of coronavirus?
I think you're right. It's a good question. And I think what we achieved as Europe at the last Council was extremely important. But I think it also helps that, at least as far as Greece is concerned, the credibility has been restored. There was no concern about Greece not spending the money wisely. Of course, there are constraints. They apply to all European countries. But I think it is important that Greece at least has restored its political credibility, and that, of course, we are receiving significant amount of money per capita or per GDP. We're big beneficiaries from this package. We intend to spend it wisely. And I've publicly said in Greece, that I'm not going to spend it on the money on handouts and subsidies here and there. I want to spend the money for real investments, real reforms. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call it a Marshall Plan for Europe, really. Certainly for Greece, it's not an exaggeration. It's if you get Greece will be receiving in total close to 70 billion euros over the next 6 years. It's a lot of money, and it's our job to make sure that this money is absorbed and is spent wisely in projects that have a big, multiplier effect, that are focused in line with the European priorities. But certainly, what happened in Brussels has helped the brand of Europe, certainly in Greece.
Let's turn to a more difficult topic, which is Turkey. You were virtually giving a speech at the United Nations General Assembly just last week. You were calling on President Erdogan to give diplomacy a chance.
So let's meet. Let's talk, and let's seek a mutually acceptable solution. Let's give diplomacy a chance.
Certainly, there's been a lot of international allies that the Greeks have been relying on, including the United States. Secretary Pompeo in your country this week. Is international diplomacy working now? I mean, certainly your two countries felt like they might have been at the brink of war just a few weeks ago.
It was a very difficult summer. And I want to make it very clear, it was not Greece that engaged in any escalation or provocation. This is about delimiting our maritime zones. It's been a disagreement we've had with Turkey for many, many years, which we haven't been able to resolve. According to international law, if you have areas which have not been delimited, no party should engage in unilateral activity until the problem is resolved. It can be resolved in two ways. We either negotiate and find a negotiated solution, or you can take the case to an international court, in this case, the International Court of Justice in The Hague, and let the court decide on your behalf. Turkey didn't do either of the two. It sent an exploratory vessel in what we consider to be Greek exclusive economic zone, accompanied by around 20 warships, and also engaged in a rhetoric towards Greece, which was extremely belligerent and very flat out hostile. Of course, we also mobilized our fleet, and we've reached a point, and I think it's good that the Turkish ship is back at port, and we've agreed in principle to begin the exploratory talks, which is essentially the first stage before you enter into a formal negotiation, to sit down and see whether we can find some sort of negotiated solution regarding this topic. But yes, international diplomacy has played a role. I think it was very, very clear to many international actors that this was not just a difference between Greece and Turkey, or for that matter, Turkey and Cyprus, because the same activity is continuing. Turkey continues the same activity. It takes it even a step further because it is actually illegally drilling within the Cypriot exclusive economic zone. But this is not just a difference between Turkey, Greece, and Cyprus. It's a difference between Turkey and Europe, because strategic European interests are at stake. And it's also a topic that should really concern the US, because, as you know, the US has expressed a renewed interest in the Eastern Mediterranean. It doesn't want, destabilizing forces in this part of the world. I think that this is why, Secretary Pompeo's visit to Greece is so important. And there's also sort of a new nexus of alliances being formed, the deal between Israel and the UAE. Greece has excellent relationships both with the UAE and with Israel. The trilaterals involving Israel, Cyprus, Greece, Egypt. There are lots of countries who think alike. Turkey chooses to move in a different direction. I wish it were not the case. I wish we could have a very constructive relationship with Turkey, not only as a neighbor, but also as a member of the European Union. But I think there's this diplomatic pressure, this sort of carrot and stick approach, Europe threatening with sanctions, which could actually have a big impact on the Turkish economy, given the state it is in right now, with the lira constantly losing value vis-a-vis the dollar and the euro. I think this international diplomatic effort resulted in us at least being cautiously optimistic that we can give diplomacy a chance. And this is what I will always try to do.
Do you think, though, I mean, the Europeans historically are divided on lots of issues, and Turkey is certainly one where there are lots of interests at play. Do you feel like that has given Turkey more flexibility? Has that caused more problems for you, or do you think that the Europeans are in a good place from Greece's perspective on this issue right now?
I think the Europeans understand much better the situation than they did maybe 6 months ago. And that at some point that this is an issue of principles. If the sovereign rights of a member state is attacked, it's an attack on the European Union. But it's also a question of hard geopolitical power. If we argue that this is an area of critical interest for Europe, and if we don't just want to be a soft economic power, if we want to exercise more geopolitical influence, we should use the levers of our power, which in this case are economic. Because we do have a lot of economic influence. And this understanding that we need to be more present and more forceful when articulating policies about our immediate neighborhood. This is not about something that's happening in the other side of the world. So we can't just afford to put the problem under the rug.
Most recently, we've got yet another war that has broken out between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Most countries are calling for an immediate ceasefire. Again, the Turkish response has been different, immediately condemning Armenia and supporting Azerbaijan. How significant is this both for Greece and the region?
Oh, we fully aligned ourselves with calls for an immediate ceasefire. And again, it raises questions as to who seems to jump into any armed conflict in the overall region rather than giving diplomacy a chance. But again, let's see how this thing plays out. What we need right now is an immediate ceasefire and give the established channels of diplomacy that are dealing with this issue a chance to reactivate rather than just engaging militarily, as seems to be the case.
And final point on these tensions is there are a lot of people that are saying that the refugees are becoming political pawns between Greece and Turkey in this fight. Obviously, in a time of coronavirus, the people that are most stuck are those that are displaced, are those that have no economic capabilities. How do you deal with that challenge?
Look, first of all, I want to point out, Ian, that the Greek Coast Guard has saved thousands of people at sea over the past years. And our number one priority is to protect human life at sea. But we also have a responsibility of protecting our borders. And of course, the people who end up coming to Greece will be treated humanely. They will be treated fairly. We have a new asylum procedure in place. So we're issuing final decisions much faster than we did. But of course, this is a problem that requires a European response. But a lot of people, since Europe failed in 2016 to deal with this problem at the European level, thought that the problem didn't exist and that it was just a problem for member states who happened to be on the external frontier of Europe to deal with. And that is not fair. And this is something which I personally will not accept as a matter of principle. So we will continue to take care of people who arrive in Greece in a humane manner and make sure we accelerate asylum applications for those of them who end up receiving asylum. They're welcome to integrate in Greece, or if they choose to go elsewhere. But for those whose applications are rejected, we need to do much more at the European level to make sure that we have organized returns to the countries of origin, because this, I can tell you now, is not happening.
Prime Minister of Greece, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, always great to see you, sir.
Thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you, Ian.
That's our show this week. Come back next week, and if you like what you see, and I hope you do, because otherwise, why do we have this strangely intimate relationship, me and you? Take a minute to sign up for G Zero's most excellent morning newsletter. It's called Signal.